At 5:42 in the morning on August 12, 2025, in the disputed waters of Scarborough Shoal, what started as routine naval intimidation turned into the most embarrassing collision in the modern history of the People's Liberation Army Navy. The Type 52D destroyer Guilin, racing at 28 knots in an intercept formation, slammed straight into the bow of Chinese Coast Guard vessel 3104 during a high-speed pursuit of the Philippine ship BRP Suluan. In the 38 minutes that followed, this humiliating accident triggered the biggest naval crisis between China and the United States in a decade, putting over 3,000 sailors on combat alert, while Beijing desperately scrambled to control a situation that had exposed the complete lack of coordination between their own naval forces. It had all started 72 hours earlier, when the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group received orders to approach South China Sea waters for training exercises with Philippine forces. The mission, officially called Extended Balikatan Operation, had seemingly routine objectives: demonstrate interoperability between Allied naval forces and maintain American presence in international waters. But the real instructions, classified at the highest levels, were far more specific. Test new rapid response protocols against Chinese escalation and evaluate Beijing's reaction times to controlled provocations. The BRP Suluan wasn't your typical military vessel. This Philippine Coast Guard patrol boat had been specifically modified for transparency operations in disputed waters. Equipped with high-definition recording systems, real-time satellite transmission, and positioning technology that could document every Chinese movement with millimeter precision. Its official mission was to inspect Philippine fishing activities around Scarborough Shoal, but its real purpose was to provoke a Chinese response that could be documented and broadcast worldwide. The Chinese operation had been planned as a routine show of force. Rear Admiral Wang Deshan, a veteran of Taiwan Strait tensions, was commanding operations from the Yulin Naval Command Center. His orders were crystal clear: intercept and deter any Philippine activity in waters that China considered territorial, but avoid any action that could be interpreted as direct aggression. The coordination between the People's Liberation Army Navy and the China Coast Guard had to be perfect, a display of professionalism that would demonstrate Beijing's absolute control over the disputed waters. Philippine Captain Reynaldo Santos of the BRP Suluan had been navigating these waters for 15 years, but he'd never faced an operation of this magnitude. When his radar systems detected multiple Chinese contacts approaching at 5:30 in the morning, he immediately activated all documentation protocols. High-definition cameras started recording. Satellite transmission systems sent automatic alerts to Manila and Washington, and precision GPS positioning logged every coordinate with sub-meter accuracy. The Chinese flotilla converging on the Suluan represented a massive demonstration of naval power. The destroyer Guilin, with its advanced anti-air missile systems and submarine warfare capabilities, led the formation alongside two Type 54A frigates. Coast Guard Vessel 3104, an 82-meter ship specially designed for maritime law enforcement operations, positioned itself for direct contact with the Philippine vessel. The coordination was supposed to be flawless. The Navy would provide intimidating presence while the Coast Guard executed the deterrent maneuvers. The first critical error occurred when the Guilin's commander, Captain Lu Mingshan, interpreted orders for close support as authorization for aggressive maneuvering. At 5:40 in the morning, he ordered a high-speed approach toward the Suluan, closing the distance to less than 200 meters in a maneuver that violated every international maritime safety regulation. His intention was to demonstrate naval superiority, but the effect was to create an extremely dangerous situation in congested waters. Coast Guard Vessel 3104, commanded by Captain Zhang Wei, had simultaneously begun its own harassment maneuvers against the Suluan. Using high-pressure water cannons and long-range loudspeakers, they were trying to force the Philippine ship to abandon the area without resorting to lethal force. Zhang had executed dozens of similar operations, but never with a warship maneuvering aggressively in the immediate vicinity. At 5:42 in the morning, as both Chinese vessels converged on the Suluan from different angles, the unthinkable happened. Captain Lu of the Guilin, completely focused on intimidating the Philippine ship, lost sight of Coast Guard Vessel 3104 entirely. His radar systems, configured to detect external threats, weren't actively monitoring the positions of friendly Chinese forces. In a close intercept maneuver, the 6,000-ton destroyer smashed directly into the Coast Guard vessel's bow at a relative speed of 18 knots. The impact was devastating. The Coast Guard vessel's reinforced bow, designed to withstand minor collisions with fishing boats, completely disintegrated under the destroyer's weight. Video captured by the Suluan's cameras showed metal fragments flying through the air as the Coast Guard ship shook violently from the impact. At least 12 crew members standing on deck were thrown into the water, and 2 were never recovered alive. The destroyer Guilin suffered significant structural damage to its port hull, with deep dents and cracks extending below the waterline. Its propulsion systems were compromised, reducing maximum speed by over 40%. More importantly, the collision had been documented in high-definition video and transmitted in real time to command centers in Manila, Washington, and multiple world capitals. Captain Santos's response was immediate and professional. Instead of trying to exploit the Chinese confusion, he ordered the Suluan to maneuver toward survivors in the water and offered immediate rescue assistance. His decision, transmitted on international emergency frequencies, was picked up by monitoring systems throughout the region and provided the Philippines with invaluable diplomatic advantage, demonstrating professionalism and humanity, while China dealt with the consequences of its own incompetence. In Beijing, news of the collision reached Naval High Command like a public relations catastrophe. Rear Admiral Wang received contradictory reports from his field commanders, each blaming the other for the lack of coordination. The video footage, already circulating on international social media, clearly showed Chinese responsibility for the accident. Worse yet, the humiliation had occurred in the presence of international media and under direct observation by American forces. At 6:30 in the morning, Washington responded with a show of force calculated perfectly to maximize pressure on Beijing. The USS Higgins, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer equipped with the most advanced Aegis combat system, received orders to head immediately towards Scarborough Shoal. Simultaneously, the USS Cincinnati, a littoral combat ship optimized for coastal water operations, was deployed to provide additional surveillance and communications capabilities. The Higgins commander, Captain Jennifer Walsh, had participated in dozens of freedom of navigation operations, but never under such diplomatically favorable circumstances. Washington's instructions were clear: approach Scarborough Shoal, document the situation, and demonstrate America's right to navigate in international waters. However, the unwritten orders were equally clear: exploit Chinese humiliation to establish a more permanent naval presence in the area. The Higgins approach generated an immediate but disorganized Chinese response. Beijing deployed 3 additional frigates toward the area, but coordination between different naval commands remained chaotic. Chinese commanders on the ground were receiving contradictory orders. Some were instructed to aggressively intercept American forces, while others received orders to avoid any additional escalation. At 7:15 in the morning, when the Higgins arrived 30 nautical miles from Scarborough Shoal, it executed the first freedom of navigation operation in the area in over 6 years. The maneuver, technically legal under international law, was timed perfectly to maximize the contrast between American professionalism and the Chinese incompetence demonstrated hours earlier. The USS Cincinnati arrived 45 minutes later, establishing a coordinated American naval presence that stood in stark contrast to the Chinese confusion. Communications between both American ships were monitored internationally, revealing a level of professionalism and coordination that implicitly underscored Chinese failures. Every American movement was designed to demonstrate naval competence, while Beijing struggled to control the diplomatic damage. Chinese humiliation deepened when People's Liberation Army forces proved unable to provide a unified response to the American presence. The destroyer that was supposed to shadow American forces had been the same damaged Guilin from the collision, now operating at reduced capacity. Replacement frigates took hours to reach position, time during which American forces operated without effective opposition in waters that China claimed as territorial. At 9:30 in the morning, Beijing attempted to salvage some dignity by deploying a J-16 fighter toward the area to expel a Philippine reconnaissance aircraft documenting the situation. However, even this maneuver revealed coordination problems. The fighter approached within just 500 feet of the Philippine aircraft, a dangerously close distance that violated safety protocols and generated additional international protests. The crisis reached its peak when China, desperate to recover credibility, issued contradictory statements about the events. Beijing initially denied that any collision had occurred, then blamed provocative Philippine maneuvers, and finally admitted to a minor accident during routine operations. Each statement contradicted the previous one, creating an incoherent narrative that was diplomatically exploited by the United States and the Philippines. The most embarrassing moment came when China officially declared it had expelled the USS Higgins from Chinese territorial waters, a claim immediately contradicted by satellite video showing the American destroyer completing its mission and withdrawing voluntarily. Washington responded with a laconic but devastating statement. The USS Higgins successfully completed its freedom of navigation operation and withdrew as scheduled. At 10:05 in the morning, the situation became even more critical when radar systems detected the takeoff of 6 J-15 fighters from Lingshui Air Base, heading at maximum speed toward Scarborough Shoal. The Higgins Command Center received the alert when the fighters were just 8 minutes flight time away. Captain Walsh immediately ordered activation of all air defense systems, while the Cincinnati maneuvered to provide additional radar coverage. The Chinese fighters arrived in combat formation, executing low-altitude intimidation passes over American forces. The lead pilot, Commander Chen Kai, had received specific orders to demonstrate air superiority without provoking an international incident. His passes at 300 feet over the American ships generated extreme turbulence, but technically remained within legal limits. The tensest moment came when one of the Chinese fighters executed a blocking maneuver directly in front of the Higgins, forcing the destroyer to alter course to avoid a collision. Captain Walsh maintained absolute calm, ordering her crew to document every Chinese movement while avoiding any action that could be interpreted as aggressive. Her communications with the Cincinnati were intercepted by the Chinese, revealing a level of professionalism that contrasted dramatically with the chaos of the morning collision. At 10:20 in the morning, the crisis escalated again when Chinese Coast Guard vessel 3104, sailing with its shattered bow visible, attempted a desperate maneuver to recover credibility. Captain Zhang, humiliated by the earlier collision, ordered an aggressive approach toward the Cincinnati in an attempt to force it out of the area. However, his ship's structural damage severely limited its maneuverability. The Cincinnati responded with a perfect display of seamanship, executing a series of evasive maneuvers that allowed the Chinese Coast Guard vessel to pass without incident while maintaining its own legal position. High-definition cameras aboard the American ship captured spectacular images of the Coast Guard vessel's destroyed bow, providing dramatic visual evidence of Chinese incompetence. The situation reached its climax when the destroyer Guilin, sailing with visible damage to its hull, attempted one last show of force by approaching the Higgins to within less than 100 meters. The maneuver was technically legal but extremely dangerous, especially considering the Chinese ship had compromised navigation capabilities due to collision damage. Captain Walsh made the decision that would define the entire operation. Instead of backing away or responding aggressively, she ordered the Higgins to maintain exact course and speed, putting the responsibility for avoiding a second collision completely in Chinese hands. The maneuver was transmitted in real time to Washington, where Pentagon observers held their breath for 90 seconds as two warships approached dangerously close. At 10:35 in the morning, the Guilin finally pulled away, implicitly acknowledging it couldn't risk a second humiliation. The Chinese withdrawal was gradual but unmistakable, with each ship abandoning the area in reverse order of importance. First, the fighters withdrew, then the support frigates, and finally, the damaged destroyer and the Coast Guard vessel, with its shattered bow. The USS Higgins completed its freedom of navigation operation exactly as scheduled, sailing a specific pattern that demonstrated American control of international waters. Every coordinate was transmitted in real time to regional naval commands, establishing precedent for future operations. The Cincinnati provided continuous coverage, documenting the complete Chinese withdrawal. When both American ships finally moved away from Scarborough Shoal at 11:15 in the morning, they had executed the most successful naval operation in disputed waters in a decade. They hadn't fired a single shot, hadn't violated any international law, but had demonstrated absolute operational supremacy over numerically superior Chinese forces. Intercepted communications from Chinese ships during the withdrawal revealed extreme frustration and confusion about how to respond to the American presence. Multiple Chinese commanders requested authorization for decisive actions. But Beijing had lost all credibility to authorize escalations after the morning collision disaster. In the hours that followed, high-definition video of the complete incident spread globally, showing the devastating sequence. Chinese incompetence resulting in collision between their own forces, Philippine professionalism offering humanitarian rescue, coordinated and effective American response, and finally humiliating Chinese withdrawal under pressure from foreign forces in waters Beijing claimed as territorial. The operation had lasted exactly 5 hours and 33 minutes from the initial collision to complete Chinese withdrawal. During that time, China had lost 2 lives, damaged 2 main vessels, exposed serious organizational deficiencies, and suffered the humiliation of being tactically outmaneuvered by foreign forces in their own claimed waters. The United States had demonstrated it could respond quickly and decisively to regional crises, while the Philippines had gained international credibility as a responsible and professional force. For the sailors who directly participated in the events, the day had been a roller coaster of extreme tension, high-risk decisions, and ultimately a demonstration that training, discipline, and professionalism can overcome superior numbers and geographical advantage when backed by superior tactical competence. Hit that notification bell if you want to find out what might happen next.